Hello, my name's Andrew Morrice. I'm a GP, been a GP for about 25 years or so, maybe more. And I'm also an educator. I work providing education for mainly primary care professionals. And I'm also a human givens therapist. And human givens is a not very well-known form of therapy, based though on a very, very useful idea. That useful idea is that all creatures survive and thrive in this world by using their innate resources to meet their needs in their environment. And it turns out that this simple sounding idea, when you really study it and look at it and think through the implications of that idea, it actually gives us a very good map for how we can optimize whatever we want to call it. We could call it health or well-being. We could even think of it as the capacity to a certain extent to self-heal. But whatever we want to call that, there is clearly a very important set of properties that emerge when we get our lives into a good enough balance. And it's not about perfection at all. It's about trading off all the different factors that affect us, developing our resources, accessing them as well as we can, and meeting our needs in the best balance that we can in our lives. And I'm also involved in doing a project in Somerset where we're trying to join up the work that community workers like health connectors and social prescribers are doing with the work that doctors and nurses are doing to try and make that all of a piece. I've got a website, joineduphealth.net, which I'll refer you to again because some of the resources from today will be on there. And I've also got a Twitter account, so do feel free to follow at joinedupdoc. So let's have a think about sleep. I think sometimes have had a tendency to undervalue sleep. There are so many things that take our attention when we're awake that we've had a tendency in our culture, perhaps in recent decades, to undervalue sleep. But we all also have a deep sense of how important sleep can be. And we all really, really dislike the experience of sleeplessness. It is can be very unpleasant and distressing, actually, even to find oneself unable to get the sleep that you instinctively feel you need. And the reason for this is that it's not just that we need sleep. It isn't a thing that we can go out and get from our environment. It's actually something that we do. It's actually a whole series of innate resources which we access during those precious hours at night, precious processes of repair and self-regulation. And of course, we need to be able to access those processes, those resources, in order to keep as good a balance as we can in our life, in order to try and have as healthy and as pleasant a life as possible. So what is going on in our sleep? I think in recent years, it's become clearer and clearer, more and more widely understood that sleep, the science that we've actually known about for many decades, has become more and more popularized. And that is that sleep is not just a period of unconsciousness. It is a period in which all sorts of processes are happening. And we can plot these out usually in the form of a graph. I'm going to talk this through with you because I think it's helpful to have a clear understanding of what these different processes are when we're asleep. In this diagram, what we've got is sleep presented as a graph. Along the bottom, we've got from the time we go to bed at 0 through to 8 hours. And then up the side, we've got various types of sleep plotted out. And at the top is wakefulness, and at the bottom is the deepest stage of non-dreaming sleep, stage 4. Now, in this idealized diagram of sleep, what's happening to this fortunate person is that they're dropping pretty much straight off to sleep and going very quickly down. They don't dream really in the true sense of rapid eye movement sleep. You go straight down into non-dreaming sleep, down through the different stages, and very quickly go into the deepest stages, 3 and 4, which are characterized by slow waves moving through the brain of electrical activity. And this is called slow wave or deep sleep. And then after that, we come up, but actually this is where we need to think about this. What is this REM state that we're showing next to wakefulness? Well, in some senses, it is like being awake in that the brain is very, very active. The brain is as active in many regards as it is when we're awake, when we're in the REM state. But the difference is that our senses are pretty tuned out from our environment, And all of the big muscles that move our body around are paralyzed, which is why all that's left is the darting movements of the eyes, the rapid eye movements. And in this first sleep cycle, we just do a little bit of this rapid eye movement sleep. And then we have another spell going down, spending most of the next sleep cycle again in these deeper stages of non-dreaming sleep, a longer period of REM. And then as we go through the REM, rapid eye movement, as we go through the night, what we're seeing is more and more that we're spending less and less time and going less down into the deeper stages of deep sleep, and we're spending more and more time in the rapid eye movement dreaming state. And we can also see some little moments of wakefulness here. Now, these are more frequent than are shown here. They always happen at least once in every dream cycle, tend to happen towards the end. And of course, for a wild animal, because all wild social animals do dream at night as well, if you've locked off your senses to a certain degree, tuned out from the world and somewhat paralyzed yourself, then it's good actually to have a moment's wakefulness just to check that the environment hasn't changed significantly before going back down into the next sleep cycle. Now, these wakings are normal, and in normal healthy sleep, you don't remember them. It is normal to wake 5 times in the night, and it is normal not to remember. Now, these wakings can be converted into periods of problematic wakefulness by various factors that we will discuss later. But it's important to realize that the waking itself is okay. It's about getting back off to sleep quickly again. So what's happening as we move through these different stages of sleep? Well, at the really the first 2/3 of the night, and in slow wave sleep, generally the shallower version of bits of slow wave sleep, we're consolidating memories in the sense that we're taking them from the working day's experience and we're storing them as long-term memories. And we're not quite sure how this happens, but certainly we're moving information from what's called the hippocampus, the memory centers, and we're storing them in the wider brain network. Now, in these deepest stages of slow wave sleep that we're describing as 3 and 4, there are some very important functions, and they're really happening only at this beginning half of the night in the slow wave sleep. We've got a thing called lymphatic flush, which is essentially a pulsatile fluid push through in the brain. It's wonderful. It sort of flushes and cleans through the brain, removing damaged bits and pieces and chemicals that aren't wanted. It's essentially a cleanse and refresh cycle. And at the same sort of epoch of the night and connected with the slow wave sleep, we're releasing our growth hormone, our main release of growth hormone during the day. And the growth hormone is important even when we stop growing, because it is one of the main hormones we use to signal and create repairing of the body. Here's a little graph of the growth hormone being released to scale, and you can see it's very much associated with that first 2 bouts of slow wave sleep. What else is going on? Well, we've also got a tendency to consolidate factual information earlier in the night. If we go through then and we look at what's going on in the REM state, what's going on there? Well, everyone agrees that it's to do with emotion processing. I can, if you ask me in the discussion period, explain to you a very elegant theory of why we spend up to 1/3 of our night with our brain being as active, using as much energy as it does when we're awake to process emotion, and how exactly we're doing that, why we need to do this. Right? We can talk about that later. I won't try and discuss it now, but essentially the REM state, the dream state, seems to be a lot about processing emotions that were aroused during the day before. And then, as we've discussed, we check the environment for safety periodically through the night. The second half of the night seems to be much more about consolidating practical skills rather than factual information. And lastly, the last period of REM sleep seems to be associated with a capacity to come to new understandings, new creative understandings, or sort of aha moments, wise insights, and so on and so forth. So there's very, very many different functionings of these different parts of the sleep as we go through the night. So what do we see when we don't get enough sleep? Now, I didn't want to dwell on this, but essentially when we're unable to access these functions adequately, and most of the research has been done simply on insufficient amount of sleep, hours spent sleeping. So this owl, as you may have spotted, is made out of coffee beans. So when the coffee bean owl gets the better of us, what's going on? Well, a variety of things, essentially. If we start at the top and work down, we see that various centers in the brain are left much more active. The threat monitoring and impulse control centers of the brain change their activity levels so that we become more prone to perceive threat around us, and we become more impulsive. You also see overall a much greater activity in the side of our automatic functioning that is all about responding to demand and threat and defense. So that goes through from pleasant, reasonable demand, reasonable stress that we can cope with, challenge, through sort of vigilance and heightened alertness, through to a sort of full threat defense, fight and flight type response. That's all the sympathetic nervous system. And we see more activity in that system when we're getting insufficient sleep. Moving down through the body, we also see that the heart, the blood vessels are not so healthy, blood pressure tends to be higher. There's also effects on our immune system, which doesn't function so well when we miss sleep. The immune system is very complicated. We tend to talk about it in oversimplified ways, but certainly our capacity to respond to things like viruses and immunizations constructively are hampered. We also see effects in the reproductive system, and we're just more accident prone, we're more likely to have road traffic accidents. So what comes out of looking across the board at all these different health effects of loss of sleep is that there are very few aspects of our functioning that are not affected when we don't sleep well. And that's really not something to be alarmed about. It's something to view as an opportunity, because anything that we can do to improve the quality of our sleep is going to be helpful to us, whatever starting point we're at. Most of us actually could probably improve the quality of our sleep. How might we know that? Well, there are various ways of measuring how well we're sleeping. Some of them are quite complicated. The most complicated is to go into a sleep lab and have your brain wired up and your breathing monitored and all the rest. But most of us can't do that. Our smartwatches and smartphones claim to be able to do the same thing. I have to admit to being a little skeptical about that. And there are various questions that we can ask ourselves. These are two validated, as they call it in scientific literature, questions about sleep. After waking up in the morning, could you fall back asleep at 10 or 11? I find that's actually quite a useful question. This one's trickier. Can you function optimally without caffeine before noon? Well, most of us are habituated to coffee. So I think if we suddenly stopped coffee or tea in the morning, we might notice it, even if we were getting enough sleep. I'm not sure that this is a massively easy question to answer. If there was only one question you could ask yourself, I'll just ask you to think about this while I'm going through the rest of this talk. What would that question be? What would be one question you could ask yourself to actually assess your sleep? You think back to all the things that are going on in that slide, with all the different stages of sleep. Is there one question we could ask ourselves that would kind of sum that all up and give us a good readout of how we're doing with our night's sleep? But moving on, I just want to run through with you now how it is that we create healthy sleep, what it is that is happening in the background to create a good night's sleep. And I've put at the top of this slide regulators of sleep, but I'm going to introduce you over the next few slides to several things that we can think of as sleep makers, and other things that are supporting our capacity to fall asleep. Now, the two that are always described when you sort of read up about this technically, we'll cover first. And one of them is really quite straightforward to understand. It's called the sleep drive, and what you'll see is starting at 7, it builds up all through the day, and then when it's time for bed and we go to sleep, it falls away, and then it builds up all through the day while we're awake, and then it drops off once we go back to sleep. That is the sleep drive. Well, what is the sleep drive? It's effectively just the buildup of a substance called adenosine in your brain, and the adenosine just builds up all the time that you're awake, and then it is broken down when you're asleep. And the brain has special receptors in it to sense the presence of the adenosine, and the more it senses the presence of adenosine, the sleepier you feel. And we have devised a way of numbing ourselves, as it were, not feeling the presence of the adenosine, which is to drink caffeine. Caffeine blocks the receptors in the brain for adenosine, so we don't feel the sleepiness that's building up, the signal that's building up to send us to sleep. So that's the sleep drive, nice and easy to understand. If we look over the same period of time at the second one, plotted along with the sleep drive, that's a circadian rhythm, a daily rhythm that wakes us up at the beginning of the day. It tends to wane off and then build up. That's the way it's shown in this graph. It's just a way of thinking about it. So that circadian rhythm is called a wake drive, but in fact that rhythm that runs through the day is got a bit more to it than that. So the around the day rhythm, the circadian rhythm, is organized by a part of our brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus that picks up how much light is in the environment. And the light signal at the beginning of the day helps to coordinate all the daily rhythms in our bodies, and this is one of the ways in which healthy sleep is so good for us, because it coordinates all the different activities in our body so nicely. If we sort of synchronize watches at the beginning of each day with this strong light signal, and it switches, and as part of that rhythm we get this wake drive. Now when we go through to the other end of the day, the suprachiasmatic nucleus also picks up that it's getting dark, and that helps us to release melatonin, which helps organize our sleep. Now, just for completeness, I'm mentioning here that melatonin is reduced. We have less of it if we use things like non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, caffeine, alcohol, and some beta blockers. Honestly, I'm not sure how important those are in practice, but I just thought I'd leave them in the presentation for completeness for you. Now, if you've been really observant, you might be thinking, well, if I look at that period of time just before 11, there's something going on. What's happening there? Do I really feel that sleepy all through the evening? Well, we'll come back to that in a minute. But just concentrating on those first two, how could we organize our day to support these two drivers? So I've just here laid out all the things we can do in a daily timetable, as it were, that will help with those two sleep makers. The first is it's all about having a regular timing. So if we start at the beginning of the day, what that looks like is having a regular wake time. And of course, if we're allowing enough time to sleep and getting enough quality sleep, that regular wake time will correspond to waking up spontaneously without an alarm. Alarms are not necessarily a pleasant way of beginning the day. So if we can get into a good enough rhythm that we don't really need one, that would be a nice thing, perhaps, and a sign that things are really, really going along very well indeed. It is obviously going to be helpful to get this bright light exposure, the sort of sunlight type light, exposed, nice, intense, full spectrum light, morning through to midday, or the equivalent light, whether it's from the sun or from artificial sunlight type lights. It's also, thinking about that sleep drive, going to be helpful if we don't drink any more caffeine. If we let the caffeine, perhaps we've drunk in the morning, break down. A way to pretty much guarantee that almost all the caffeine is out of your system is to stop at midday. I'm assuming when I say that you're not drinking 10 cups of strong coffee in the morning. But the earlier you stop drinking caffeine, the less of it there will be in your blood come bedtime, and the stronger you will feel that sleep drive. Similarly, if we deplete the sleep drive, because it'll disappear whenever we're asleep. If we nap in the evening, we'll deplete our sleep drive for our bedtime. Now, sleeping in the middle of the day is natural, particularly nearer the equator. It's completely normal to have actually 2 blocks of sleep. So there's nothing wrong necessarily with sleeping in the middle of the day. It's just that if we sleep too much and too late in the day, we will then find it very difficult to get off to bed again at night. The way our society works, it's very hard for us not to sleep in that classic 16 hours of wakefulness and 8 hours of sleep, because that's the way our society's organized, our family life and work and everything else. It's also clear that it's helpful if it gets dark. Okay. Quite how important different light spectra and screens are is open for some scientific debate, but generally, the more it's like firelight or candlelight, dim and yellow, the thinking is that the better off you are. And obviously, just as with the regular wake time, it's helpful to have a regular bedtime, and that between the two of those, we've allowed for most adults, it's going to be 8 hours. The number of people that actually need less than 8 hours sleep opportunity time, as it's called, are very few. Very few of us need less than that. And obviously, a bit like with the napping, and this is more and more important, the more difficulty you're having dropping off to sleep, the more important it is to avoid sleeping outside that regular 8-hour window. So as I pointed out earlier on, if we look at that graph, some of you may have thought, well, what about this period at the end of the day when we're not feeling that sleepy? What is it that's keeping us awake? And what I'm about to say now is based on a lot of reading and observation and conversations with patients, but I've not actually seen this stated yet in the literature. It's probably out there somewhere. But what's going on here is that we haven't relaxed yet. In other words, our demand response system, our sympathetic system, is still switched on. Because in order to get off to sleep, we need to be sufficiently relaxed. We need to have switched on enough of the rest and restore side of the system. We've got the sympathetic system that is about demand and threat response. And then we've got the relaxation system, which is about resting, restoring, and replenishing. Now, if we don't have enough of this relaxation response activated at the end of the day, it does to a certain extent override that sleep drive. So it's really, really important if we don't have that relaxation in the system and we haven't switched down the sympathetic by relaxing enough, then we may find it very hard to drop off to sleep. Or to maintain sleep, actually. So in a sense, activating this relaxation system, along with the adenosine and the daily rhythm, those are the three main sleep makers. And we need to support all three of those, certainly at a bare minimum, to be assured of good sleep. But there are some other things that contribute. We are creatures of condition. We are all very conditioned. It's not just Pavlov's dogs who could be conditioned to respond in a certain way to cues in the environment. In fact, everything that we see and hear and feel and sense around us, we have learned a set of expectations about what those things are about. And if the time running up to our bedtime and the space in which we're attempting to rest and relax and sleep and have our intimate time, if those spaces are full of cues, objects, phones, televisions, stuff to do with work, anything really that is to do with threat or demand or difficulty, or wakefulness indeed, or stimulus, anything that has that sort of cue to it that we've learned to respond to in that way is going to get in the way of the relaxation. It's going to get in the way of expecting sleep, because it's very clear that the more we can build up a ritual, as it were, or a routine around sleep that sets off an expectation of sleep, the better that will be. So it's all about confidently expecting sleep. The last thing is sort of so obvious, but it's really important sometimes also to let ourselves off the hook with this one. Sometimes we have conditions that mean we're not comfortable. Okay. We need to feel comfortable enough to sleep, and particularly to sleep soundly through the night, whether it's something like pain or whether it's something seemingly trivial like itching or just being too hot or too cold, a partner that snores, noise, anything that gets in the way of our comfort at night is going to be unhelpful. So being as comfortable as possible is really helpful. And lastly, because when the sun went down throughout the history of our evolution, it got cooler, a drop in temperature can be helpful, and we'll mention that in a moment. So how can we support these further factors, including this last sleep maker, the relaxation? Well, some people say that we shouldn't exercise in the evening because it leaves us too aroused. Now, I think that is probably a counsel of perfection, and the perfect is the enemy of the good. So if the only time you can exercise in the evening, that's fine, particularly if you find that you really relax after you've exercised and it helps you to go deeper relaxed to do some exercise, well, then that's fine. It's really useful to avoid stressful stimuli and situations before we go to bed. Really, really important to try and minimize that, organize our day so that we're not getting pinged by stuff. And similarly, to remove anything from our environment that has a sort of wake, demand, stimulus type connotation to it. They may not be things we're conscious of, but anything that is particularly to do with our waking, demanding and stimulating life, even if we don't, every time we look at it, go, whoo, it's really, really important that our sleeping environment and sleeping time is not surrounded by that stuff. Engaging deliberately in some form of relaxation before bed really, really, really helps. It's an easy step to miss out, but it's also an easy step to put in. So 10 to 20 minutes of deliberate, deep relaxation before bed can make a massive difference. And as part of that, of course, a bath or a shower could be part of that. And of course, when you get out of the shower, you cool off a bit. So that helps with the cooling. All of this is better if you've got a routine. You can create and stick to a routine, that's going to be better. And then a couple of other tips. Don't try to fall asleep. You can't try to fall asleep. This is impossible. All you can actually do is accept that you're awake. If you don't drop off straight to sleep, accept that you're awake and focus on and enjoy resting and relaxing. And I've given some pointers about how to do that in some of the resources we'll come to in a minute. So the resources I've offered you and am offering generally, as it were, through my website and my work in Somerset is could be called sleep hygiene. What I found, the reason I created these resources, I found that much sleep hygiene advice misses out things. If you read through all the literature on this and look at all the things that help promote sleep, it doesn't look to me as if the people that wrote the sheets had read all the literature necessarily. So what I tried to do was pull together everything that we could find and put it all in one place in an easy to read, or hopefully an easy to read format. The other thing is that, of course, you can read these great long lists of recommendations, but of course, for any one of us, there'll be specific things that need to be paid attention to, perhaps. It's important to remember that you might look at a sleep hygiene advice sheet and think, well, I'm doing most of that. But that's not really the point. What we're looking for are what are the other things that we could improve. Anything that is already in place, that's great. And anything we can't alter, well, never mind. But what are the things that we can do to improve? That's the key to using resources like this, is to remember that they've been written for everybody, not just for you. And sometimes it's helpful to have a therapist or somebody helping you. There's a lot of evidence for a thing called CBT-i, which just stands for Cognitive Behavior Therapy for Insomnia. This is just really a rebranding of sleep hygiene, essentially, but it's very strong. It's for people that have really got severe insomnia. And so what you've got is a very strict CBT therapist making you stick to that 8-hour window only. And really giving you lots and lots of help and support with the sleep hygiene, with avoiding the stimulants and stimuli before bedtime, and helping you stick to those points if your sleep comes off the rails again. So really, all that CBT-i is somebody helping you really stick to the program. So that's just to say that, yes, there's evidence for CBT-i, and therefore, if we look at what the elements are that we can do, whether we're just getting a friend or a worksheet to help support us, we can do that. We can do that for ourselves. And so if you go to my website, joineduphealth.net, and you go to the resources page, you're very welcome to use these resources. There are a variety of topics. But if you look at the bottom, there are some on, actually, I'm not sure if they're at the bottom, but they're in there. They're in the grid. There's a big grid of resources. And there are two that I draw your attention to. There's How's My Sleep, which is a way of assessing your sleep. And Sleep well, which is just general advice on getting healthy sleep, and then still awake is really for if you call yourself somebody that's got a definite problem, you're not sleeping. You're aware of being of having insomnia to some degree. So so the idea really is to try and divide them up a bit, so that you don't have to read through a great long list of strict recommendations if actually you don't need them. If you're just wanting some general pointers, that's what Sleep Well is for. Now, of course, often as a doctor, I'm asked for help with this. And I find that people are really, really, really happy to have some good resources to draw on, particularly if we can have a helpful conversation and come to some initial understanding about what's going wrong with the sleep. But frequently what we're actually being approached for is good old Zopiclone, sleeping tablets. And this raises a question, well, what are they good for? We all know that they can be habit-forming and somewhat addiction-forming. It's really important to know that Zopiclone, for many people that take it, does not bring about a normal night's sleep. What it does is it actually switches on the relaxation centers in your brain, the same centers that you would breathe on doing a good slow mindful breathing technique or yoga breathing technique, slow regular breathing. The same centers in the brain get switched on by that as we switch on artificially with the Zopiclone. But the Zopiclone is a really strong switching on of that. And so it's just an artificial form of relaxation. And it helps to relieve us of that horrible feeling of lying awake. But a lot of the way that it relieves us of that horrible feeling of lying awake is through our expectations. We confidently expect this medicine to help us. And it's been shown when you compare real sleeping tablets of this class with dummy ones, as we might call them, placebos, tablets that look the same but haven't got the medicine in. What we see is that if you average out the amount of time it was taking people, the difference in how long it took people to get to sleep, looking broadly at all the studies that have been done, the average amount of time that people are aware of is reduced by taking sleeping tablets by 25 minutes. But all but 7 of those minutes can be reduced by the placebo, by simply the expectation that you're going to fall asleep. So what this shows us is how powerful our expectations are in creating a phenomenon like sleep. So that's a very interesting thing. The Zopiclone really is as much about what I was talking about, the confident expectation of sleep and relaxation, as it is separate, somehow different. It's just an artificial and specific way of triggering the relaxation and triggering that confident expectation. The other thing that we're often asked about, although not quite so much as before, is melatonin. Now, melatonin is something that we've got problems about prescribing. So, you may be somebody that's in this situation. My doctor won't or can't prescribe melatonin. And you may also have heard that pistachios have got, there are various foods that have got melatonin in them. Now, if we dig into this a bit, what we can see, we need to remember, first of all, that melatonin helps us to organize our sleep. It won't actually make us feel sleepy. Or maybe I shouldn't have said that. Maybe I should have given you the expectation that it would make you feel sleepy. Maybe it does make us feel sleepy. Okay, so but a pistachio contains 230 micrograms of melatonin per gram. And if we look at the weight of a pistachio, what we can see is that the amount of melatonin we need to get into our bloodstream to be the same as what our body would produce naturally in a healthy circadian rhythm, if we look at that, it's 3 pistachios. Now, 3 pistachios, we don't actually know how well, it probably depends on a lot of things, what else is in your tummy, how well you've chewed and broken down the pistachios, and a bunch of other things. So if you wanted to be sure that you'd got that normal dose of melatonin, you might need to eat closer to 15 to 20 pistachios to be really sure of it. And you'd need to be eating those in the later part of the evening if you wanted to do that. So melatonin, yes, there we are. You can get it from pistachios. And that's probably a nicer and more healthy way of getting it than from some potentially dicey supplier online.